Hello, BioE 131 writers. Welcome to the writing workshop. I'm sorry I'm sick today. I'm going to give a quick summary of what I would have told you because I want you to get psyched about writing and I want you to get psyched about doing your first writing assignment for the course. So this is the writing workshop. Let me go to the iPad. Come on, iPad. There you go. So this is the remote and asynchronous writing workshop. So I just want to tell you basically how to write the essay. So you can do it in many ways, but here's one way if you're stuck or if you need a little outline. Okay, so a BioE 131 ethics essay. That's what I'm going to focus on because that's what we kind of care about the most for this class, which is a writing in the major. So the first thing you want to do is you're going to have to be succinct in all of this essay because you only have like 1,000 words or whatever. But you want to succinctly summarize the issue you're addressing, the issue that you are addressing, why it's important or at least interesting. If something is neither interesting or important, then like, why are you even talking about it? Why important and interesting? Um, And then the framework, the ethical framework that you have selected to base your analysis on. And then finally, the answer that you're going to come to. So this is not going to be a surprise ending. The answer and your conclusion. So you might even say something like, using consequentialism, I will argue that X is wrong or X is right or whatever. So that's the first basically paragraph or so. Secondly, you want to present your argument using the structure of the framework. And I'll give you an example. In some frameworks, it's extremely clear what this is. So, for example, number one, consequentialism. Well, you would briefly summarize, I'm talking 1 to 2 sentences because we assume that everybody knows what consequential is. Briefly summarize 1 to 2 sentences on the framework. Consequentialism is a trade-off between costs and benefits. And then it would be very natural for you to summarize all the positives, summarize all the risks or the negatives. Then you're going to have to do something hard, which is justify why, justify which one wins. Are there, I think you know what I mean. Is there more benefits than risks, or is there more risks than benefits? It's easy if it's money, but if it's not money, you're going to have to use a lot of apples and oranges comparisons because the negatives might be in different terms than the positives. And we're looking for how you do that and how you can't just say, well, I just based on how I'm thinking, this is more important. We'd like to see what your reasoning is, and we'd like you to try to convince somebody who's on the fence why you're right in this assessment. So, and then you might want to end with an assessment of how easy or hard. By the way, a C with a line above it means width. I'll do that in a lot of my notes. End with an assessment of if this is an easy case or a hard case. And that's hard to do for you because you might say, well, this is borderline, I recognize. And that'll feed into one of the next to step 3. But let me give you the example for some of the other frameworks. For Kant, deontology, again, 1 to 2 sentences about what's going on here. You're going to talk about, rights and duties. You're going to argue and pick the key rights and duties that you're focusing on in your argument. You're going to analyze the case with respect to WR2, with respect to the rights and the duties. And then you're going to conclude with how you trade off all the considerations you've discussed, all the duties and rights to the time to kind of figure out which one drives the decision, which one or group drive your decision that something is either right or wrong. For common morality, or the Belmont principle with the additional 4, 1 to 2 sentences again. Then right away, you want to mention that we have autonomy, justice, beneficence, non-maleficence. For each, you want to comment on its relevance to the case, not just relevance, its relevance and its kind of the direction that it makes you lean. Like based on autonomy, I think that this is not a good thing. So its direction, I'll call it its ethical direction and impact on your decision. Then again, you have to discuss how you balance or weigh all of these things to come to a final decision. And then finally, just as an example, and there's a lot more ethical theories than what we've discussed in class, is casuistry. 1 to 2 sentence reminder. Then you want to do a summary of the previous case that you're using for comparison with this case. Then you have to summarize the ways that they are similar. You probably should summarize the ways they are different. Then you need to make an explicit argument that's similar. The similar ways are much greater than the differences, obviously, because if you're making a casuist argument, you want to say that this is a good precedent. This previous case is good, and therefore, yes, there are some differences, but they're not as important as the similarities, which is what drives it. So make an explicit argument about the similarities and differences in their regular weights, and then again, show the logic of your final decision. Okay, so that's a nice summary for all of the 4, what you might want to consider doing. That's going to take a couple of paragraphs, probably 2 or 3, depending on which framework you're using. So for all the frameworks then, the third thing you're going to want to do is acknowledge, and this is going to be hard for some of you, acknowledges the weaknesses, problems, or legitimate objections. Legitimate objections that a reasonable person might have to your analysis. And then try to provide, and this is tough because it's going to have to be very brief because you're running out of space. So try to provide brief, a response kind of in 1 sentence, per weakness or problem, a response to why you don't think it's fatal to your argument. If you do think it's fatal, then you should not be making the argument. You're going to have to reconsider your conclusion. So I assume that the weaknesses, problems, legitimate objections that before you're writing, you're going to consider them. You're going to figure out what they mean, why they're good, and then you're going to have a brief description of why they don't move you to change your conclusion. And then finally, is something that there is not. I don't think you're going to write a conclusion and summary. And you know why? It's because we're only giving you 1,000, 1,300, whatever it is, words, and they've just read your argument. You told them what your conclusion was, both in the introduction in step one, at the end of step two, when you discussed how it all came together for your decision, and implicitly when you were acknowledging the weaknesses. You don't need to tell them again what your conclusion is and why. And if you do, then something is very wrong. So I would say in general, and people will violate this, and I'm not going to go crazy about it, but I just don't think you need it. So that's for the final part of this. I just want to look at some essays that have gotten A's. Thought you might enjoy that. These are good essays that have gotten A's in the past. So I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to now share something else, a different screen. Can't remember which ones I want to share. Maybe I'll share the whole. Sharing the whole screen is just a big mistake. All right, let's just go randomly. Boom. We're going to look at this one. These are real essays. The names have been changed to protect the excellent writers who got A's on these essays. I'm not going to go over them in detail. I think we are going to make them available on the website. So this person addressed the issue of whether you can use CRISPR to edit the human genome. So they discuss CRISPR, why it's important. And then it says, in this report, I'm going to talk about the ethics of it using principalism, or also known as common morality, autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. And they give the conclusion. Boom, one paragraph. As I recommended, they do a segment on autonomy. You only want to make the interesting and useful points, or, don't, you have limited space, so you have to figure out what are the most important and compelling points on autonomy. Beneficence and non-maleficence, they group it together. That's fine, because those are kind of related. Whoops, I just messed up the, let me undo that. Beneficence and maleficence, they go through that. They define what they each mean, and then they hit a couple of highlights in their argument. They also do an alternatively set statement where they say, you could look at it in another way. Then they go to justice, remind you what it is, do an analysis of justice, and then they finish. So what they did is they worked in the objections and concerns into each of the 4 areas. That's totally allowed. Or you could do it at the end in a separate section. And this got an A. Let's look at another one. Stop the share. Go to a new share. Oops, that's the same one. Stop that share. Get a different one, Russ. Make it take up the whole space. Okay, that's the same one again. I'm sorry. It's a little pathetic. This one is different. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Oh, I see what's happening. Okay, sorry about that. That was a little technical glitch. Well, this one you can tell is from last year because they had to do their ChatGPT declaration. I did not use ChatGPT. This was an ethical essay on a topic of their choosing. So what was the topic? It was about artificial intelligence in medicine. And they say that, and they had actually written the prompt, which I'm not showing you. That'll be for your final assignment. You write both the prompt and the answer, but I wanted to show you a good essay answer. So this essay will use common morality theory to analyze ethical issues of a university hospital using a new early diagnosis algorithm for all of its patients. And they say implementing would not satisfy the benefits, and then it is thus not ethically justified. So again, that first paragraph tells the whole story, and then you go into detail. Then this person goes through each. You can see a discussion of autonomy and how they apply it, beneficence and how they apply it. Non-maleficence is a different paragraph here, so they didn't combine them the way the previous person did. And then justice. And then they look at a utilitarian analysis as a comparison. And they might have done a Kantian analysis as well, but they show why they're not changing their mind. And then they have a final, they do kind of have a concluding paragraph, and they got an A, so you can clearly get an A with a concluding paragraph, but you just got to make sure that you've said everything else that you need to say. Okay, let's look at one more. Share screen. Think it's which one do we bring up here? Deep brain stimulation. This was, I think, also a topic of the student's own choosing. ChatGPT was not used. That will be a trend in people who get A's. Not 100%, but I want you to be aware of that. Starts out with a nice little story. 52-year-old with wheelchair-dependent Parkinson's disease says that deep brain stimulation gave their life back again. And then they review what it is. It has its potential. Should Parkinson's be used? And this is an advanced one because the student went out and learned about a new theory, John Rawls' theory of justice as fairness and Norman Daniels' theory of accountability for reasonableness. So this is already impressive as long as they don't screw up, because they didn't use one of the 4 frameworks that we presented. They went out and read more and found another theory that they liked. Good for them. But then they have a special duty to explain these theories so that the TAs and the professors, of course, Dr. Magnus knows all of this in his sleep, but the rest of us need to learn what these theories are. So the person says, Rawls proposes that citizens should da 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 da, and this is the priorities. And then they go into the details of how this matches for that case. And I presume that they do another thing for Daniels. So I really just wanted to show you this. Here's the Norman Daniels part. So I just wanted to show how this student took 2 people, traded them off against one another, had to explain what the theories were, and then apply them, and had to write it within the word limit, and had to do a good job, and they did. And then you can see at the end, they're talking about counter arguments, as I said you should. And then they do not really have a summary. They go into some, like, from an ethics perspective, there's a few other considerations that you would want to add. By the way, that's another thing you can do in your essay. You can say, okay, we were given this prompt. If the facts were a little bit different, I might make a different call. That's especially if you're not confident or if it's not an easy case. You might have a very short paragraph saying what would make it a hard case or what might change your mind. That's not mandatory, but sometimes that's worthwhile. Okay, that was 21 minutes and 5 seconds on how to write the essay and a few examples of good essays. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you today. I'm going to go to bed now. Have a good one. Thank you. Stop the share. Stop the recording.